Well, good morning, everyone. I'm John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republicans, and I'd like to welcome you to our Republican Media Availability. With us today, who will be joining us here soon from the House of Representatives, we will have House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District and House Republican Deputy Leader Mike Steele from the 12th District. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District and Senate Republican Floor Leader Shelley Short of the 7th District. And with that, again, we will have the House Republicans joining us here in progress. With that, I will just turn it over to Senator Braun for some opening remarks.
All right. Well, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. Busy morning as we get full into floor activity for the first time in the session. Not the first floor activity, but the first concentrated period of floor activity over the next 6 days until cutoff next Tuesday. Lots to talk about the both the policy and the fiscal cutoff over the last week. If you may be interested, I'll highlight just a few things that have to do with our priorities. On public safety, we continue to work on this issue. I feel a little bit like we've stalled out. The other side of the aisle has, spoken the words public safety, but we really haven't seen much progress on bills that will help us move towards a safer Washington. So we're going to continue to push on, bipartisan ideas like growing the number of pilot sites or sites for the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And adding some additional funding, but we're also going to continue to push on things that are a little more controversial on how we treat our law enforcement officers fairly and therefore hopefully improve morale and improve recruiting, which I think is the biggest problem. Affordability, lots to talk about there. Food, gas, housing, childcare, healthcare, all continue to go up because of policies we have here in our state. I'm just going to highlight one real quickly this morning. Last night, the majority passed out 5770. This is a bill that, as you may be familiar, would increase the growth rate on property taxes from 1% to 3%. This, as I'm sure you know, was put into place by the voters about 2 decades ago, ruled unconstitutional, but then put in place very quickly by the legislature in a special session. Been in place for a long time and working, I think, quite well. And the thing I would highlight is there continues to be a pretty deceptive narrative out there about the funding for cities and counties. I'll just share with you a couple facts we got from the state auditor's office. They got a really interesting tool that helps mine data on local revenue collection. But county revenue growth over the last 10 years, 82%. That would be 8.2% per year. Median income growth, about half of that, 44%. Inflation with CPI, 35%. So they're growing 2.5 times CPI. IPD measure for inflation 23%. Or I'm sorry, 23%. So almost 4 times the growth of inflation. So here they're out there saying that they're pinched for money, and yet they're growing it 2 to 3 to almost 4 times the rates of inflation or personal income growth. That's the story that the voters aren't hearing when they're getting ready to be faced with a 3 times increase in the growth of property taxes. The other thing I think is important to note is they'll say, hey, we're just not making it because we're so reliant on property taxes. Again, I would encourage you to go look at the facts. The facts say because of the change in buying patterns, remember we changed some years ago. So when you buy something online, that sales tax goes to wherever you happen to live. As a result, counties have seen an enormous growth in sales tax over the last 10 years, so that today, if you take an average across all 39 counties, it's 21.7% is their funding for property tax, 21.3% from sales tax, almost equal. If you go to King County, it's actually almost over 2% higher. Sales tax is actually a bigger funder for King County than property tax. So this narrative that property tax is limited to 1% and they can't grow is just plain out false. They're growing at many times the rate of other folks, and they're spending. Spending is the problem, and the result and their solution to that is to tax people more, and tax people more in particular on places that are going to hurt homeowners and renters the most. Which is pretty much everyone, by the way, when it comes to housing, and it is going to hurt folks living, paycheck to paycheck or in poverty the most. So this is just a bad idea, and another example of the Democratic majority being indifferent to the concerns of working Washingtonians that are trying to afford to live here in Washington State. Last thing I'll highlight is our third priority: education, children. We did pass some, I think, some pretty good bills out of Ways and Means for education last night, and I hope they continue to work forward. We'll see where those goes. I'm not going to go over those in detail unless you have questions. But more broadly for children, I will highlight we continue to have significant problems in our criminal or juvenile rehabilitation program. In the last few weeks in Green Hill, which is in my district, we've had 7 overdoses is my count. DCYF will argue and say, no, there's one less than that. Even if they're right, it's still very, very troubling. We've had a riot. We've had a staff member, accused of smuggling in drugs. We've had a staff member inadvertently exposed to fentanyl, had to have Narcan and taken to the hospital. These are big, big deals, and they're not getting much attention right now, in my view, or at least not getting enough attention. This is another example where from childcare to early ed to K-12 to higher ed to criminal rehabilitation to child protective services to foster care, we continue to let down our children. So with all that, I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Drew Stokesbury to introduce what's going on in the House.
Well, thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. As he mentioned, I'm Drew Stokesbury, House Republican leader. And with me, I have Mike Steele from the 12th District, the House Republican deputy leader. Some news this morning. As you know, there have been 6 initiatives to the legislature that have been certified to us. Each time those initiatives were introduced and referred to committee on the House floor, House Republicans made a motion to instruct that committee to hold a hearing. Every one of those was voted down by every single House Democrat. This morning, the ranking Republican members on each committee to which an initiative was referred has sent and delivered a letter to the chair of that committee formally requesting hearings be held. When we had moved on the floor to instruct those committee to hold hearings, the excuses that we were given by the House Majority Leader were along the lines of these decisions are up to the chair of the committees, and because these initiatives aren't subject to cutoff, there is plenty of time later in session to take them up. So with that in mind, we have now asked the committee chairs in a formal manner to hold hearings, as is their prerogative, and pointed out that there's not that many committee meetings left that are scheduled, and we are now past the first cutoff. And since these initiatives aren't subject to cutoff, we should begin scheduling hearings right away. So we will see what happens, but House Republicans continue to insist that we should at minimum hold hearings, and that's a position, by the way, that the Seattle Times editorial board wrote about over the weekend, agreeing with us. And with that, pivoting kind of to some of the other things we're dealing with in the legislature. Yesterday was fiscal committee cutoff. House of policy cutoff was last week, and unfortunately, not a lot of good news in terms of fixing the growing catalog of crises that's facing Washington State. House Republicans have talked a lot about the public safety crisis we're facing, how we are 51st in the country in terms of law enforcement officers per capita. There were several bills, both left over from last year, introduced by Republicans this year, introduced by Democrats this year, none of which got a hearing or voted out of committee. So unfortunately, there does not seem to be any bills moving that would provide funding to local cities and counties to hire more police officers to get us out of last place in police officers per capita. Some of our priorities to fix the drug and fentanyl crisis did not move either, unfortunately. We had proposals to toughen penalties for fentanyl manufacturers and distributors. That was a bill from Representative Mossbrucker. We had a bill to create a statewide Bureau of Narcotics within the State Patrol to help go after fentanyl distributors and investigate cases that cross state lines. That was a bill from Representative Jacqueline Maycomber. And we had a bill that would toughen penalties for intentionally exposing children and vulnerable adults to fentanyl. That was a bill from Representative Graham. And none of those seem to have made it past cutoff, unfortunately. Our solutions to try to fix the housing crisis by incentivizing and building more housing to increase the supply have not gotten anywhere either. Our proposal to send rebates to Washington drivers to offset the 50 cent to dollar increase in the price of gas and deal with the affordability crisis facing Washington hasn't gotten a hearing yet either. So, we came in a session identifying a number of crises that Washington was facing, and we came armed with solutions to begin to address those crises. And unfortunately, the Democrats didn't seem that interested in taking up these solutions, even when there was bipartisan agreement on the problem, and even in some regards, bipartisan agreement on how to begin solving the problem. Unfortunately, a few bad bills did are still alive, and I think House Republicans will be continuing to fight those as we hit the floor this week. So. That's all I've got from an overview perspective, but I think happy to open it up to questions at this point.
All right, with that, we'll go to Jerry Cornfield.
I think I can. All right. Can you hear me? I wasn't expecting to be first. Thanks. Well, unfortunately, one of my questions deals with transportation, and neither senator is on the transportation committee, but I'll go ahead and ask. They did move a fiscal bill dealing with they call the transportation electrification strategy. There were two provisions in there that seemed to have some issues. All the Republicans on the committee voted against it, and the one issue I'm wondering about is the direct sales to car buyers. It's been an issue pitting those who want to have more permits like Tesla to be able to do what Tesla does, other manufacturers, and then the auto dealers have pushed back saying that it will hurt the industry. I wonder what the Republicans' position is on this change in law opening up the market.
Well, you're right, Jerry. I don't know much about that bill because I don't sit on transportation. I do know that this challenge has been with us for a number of years. First with Tesla, that's been probably close to 10 years ago now. And then more recently with Rivian and others who looked for the ability to sell direct. And I think, I just say the dealers are a very important part of our communities across the state. And therefore we're very conscious of their concerns. I do think the market is evolving, both in the automobile market and the market for virtually everything else. I mentioned earlier the shift in sales tax revenues from cities to counties because of people's preference for buying online and what the streamlined sales tax does in terms of where that money is delivered when you buy online. I think ultimately that's the direction we go, but I think we need to do it in a way that supports our auto dealers and make sure they are in a position to continue the type of work they have done in communities across the state. So I don't expect any radical changes in this area. I do think over years you'll get changes, but I don't think anything this year, frankly.
Jerry, I'd just like to add to that. The other piece that we hear pretty consistently on issues that Senator Braun talked about is also consumer protection. Making sure that as we go into that space, potentially more of direct sales, what is the consumer's ability to be protected, with those purchases? It's one thing if you have a brick and mortar dealership in a community, versus a direct sale. So I think that continues to be an issue. We want to make sure that that's addressed.
Yeah, and speaking from the House's perspective, Jerry, different members will probably have a little bit different perspectives, but from my perspective, I will echo what Shelley says. Our local franchise auto dealers are pillars of our communities. They're the ones that sponsor Little League teams, buy tables at breakfast fundraisers for local area nonprofits. They do really, really good work in terms of furthering the sort of collective goals of the community. The other thing that they are a really good source for is repairs. And when cars get recall notices, cars are getting more and more complicated, harder and harder for people to fix their own cars. But local franchise auto dealers are always a place that folks can go. So ensuring that those continue to exist and are successful, I think it should be a top public policy goal of the legislature. There is some convenience to be had in direct sales, but I think the solution to that is to allow to work on the state's franchise dealership law to allow some of that work to be done by local franchises, so that the local franchises that are already here, that know their customers, that know the community, have more opportunity to do in-home delivery and things like that. I don't think the solution to this is necessarily to let big out-of-state companies, some of which are owned by the Saudi government, to come in and undercut these local companies that are pillars of our communities.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
I had another question, but would you like to identify the big company, out-of-state company owned by a Saudi, just so we know who you're talking about?
Jerry, I think anybody who follows financial markets knows which company I'm referring to.
On the other part, I want to go back, Senator Braun, you started by talking about the property tax bill. I think it was 5770. And I wonder if you could talk more broadly. Obviously, your member of your caucus has sponsored a couple bills that would restore funding of liquor and cannabis dollars to local governments. The state took away a share a few years ago, and it looks like your caucus supports going back to the percentages before. Is that still the position, or do you think local governments have enough and you don't need to restore liquor and cannabis percentages as they were before?
So I think you're referring to a bill from Senator Wagner, who has a bill that would restore the liquor amount moved over the state in 2012. And yeah, I think we would still support that. The idea of that is for additional money, specifically aimed at public safety. And I think we're supportive of that. My argument was, look, when they make an argument that they're starving at the county and city level, the facts just say it's not true. And we know that the people overwhelmingly object to this increase in property tax, both from the vote from 20 years ago and from the fact that we had a record number of folks sign up in opposition to the bill. 90% of the people signed in opposition to 5770 when it was heard. So I think those sound kind of, I'm going in two different directions. But on the one hand, we're saying we don't need more money, but because they've grown at twice the rate of personal income growth. At the same time, we are supportive of additional money into public safety specifically, and we're willing to look at other ways to get them funding. I think the bill that moves cannabis money over is actually Senator Mullet's bill, but we'd support both of them. I think they're both good ideas, specifically aimed at public safety. But the notion that somehow that counties and cities are over-reliant on property tax is just factually inaccurate. One other thing I'll add in there, because I didn't mention it before, another thing, even if it were true they were relying on property tax, when you look at the actual property tax growth in King County as an example over the last 5 years, it's 7% per year. It's enormous. So when is enough? That's because of new property, new construction.
All right, next we'll go to Laurel Demkovich.
Hi, good morning. I have a housing related question, specifically creating more affordable housing in rural areas. I know that there are a couple of bills in the House that focus on this, specifically like Representative Lowe's DADU bill. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what your hope is in each of your caucuses for increasing housing in rural areas and what maybe has bipartisan support and might make it through this year.
We have I happen to have two rural housing bills that allow for more flexibility in building accessory dwelling units, ADUs, in rural areas. One is a tax incentive that counties can offer that is approved for King County. This would broaden it for all the counties. and that's has moved with bipartisan support. And the other one would simply make it so counties have to allow for detached ADUs in rural areas. And some counties do allow this, some counties don't. We think it's a good policy. And the fact of the matter is people aren't waiting. And if they can't build an ADU in a particular county, what they're doing is moving in an RV and working around the law. We should just make it so it's allowed, it's done. There's clear regulations, it's safe and secure, and we're not asking citizens to hide what they're doing, that they can do it legally and upfront. And this all adds to housing opportunities in rural areas.
Laurel, I'd like to follow up. The detached ADU bill received significant discussion in committee. And I think the challenge is how and this isn't meant to be, bad comment, but how urban legislators view the rural, way of life and the way the Growth Management Act has impacted a lot of growth and potential for housing. There's a lot of difference. I'm proud to work with Senator Lovelet. We've done bipartisan work in this arena. We're trying to get there potentially on detached ADU bill, but the thing that we can't do is over regulate it to the point where it's not, realistic. I'll just share that Stevens County, on average is 19 people per square mile. So even if you doubled that density, that's assuming every property owner is going to do that. You've got 38 people per square mile. It's very important to protect, our ag land, natural resource lands, critical areas. We can do that and still allow housing. So we'll see if that conversation continues. But she and I have also worked on some land use bills. As you know, the Growth Management Act has become quite regulatory when it was really at its inception was a planning document. And part of that is due to appeals and litigation. And so I have two bills that actually one's going to be voted on today, 5834, that allows a no net swap when it comes to your urban growth area. When growth hasn't occurred where you thought it might have 10 or 20 years ago, you're able to have a process to adjust that. And then the other one is what they call a LAMIRD, which is local areas of more intense development, and just making sure that where people live, they can have appropriately sized development to meet their needs locally. So if you live 20 miles from an urban center, you're not having to drive that 20 miles to maybe go to a grocery store or to an auto parts store or things like that. Both of those bills are progressing. I think they definitely become tools that local governments can use.
Yeah, Laurel, over in the House, you mentioned one of the bills from Representative Sam Lowe, and I think that is currently in rules and will hopefully run sometime this week that would deal with ADUs in rural areas. The other bill that is still alive and in fact has already passed the House is from Representative Andrew Barkis that would allow lot splitting. So I think that's one we're pretty excited about. We had a few other proposals this year that unfortunately don't seem to have made it out of committee that would have helped with housing everywhere, but including in rural areas. Representative April Connors from out in the Tri-Cities had a bill to create a Homes for Heroes program, which would have provided some state assistance to help with down payments for first homes purchased by police officers, firefighters, EMTs, nurses, veterans who are looking to buy their first home. Representative Cindy Jacobson had a bill to try to expedite housing permits, especially for low cost and multifamily housing, including duplexes, triplexes, ADUs, things like that. And then Representative Greg Cheney had a bill that would try to incentivize landlords to stabilize rent through a rent relief incentive program that would have provided property tax credits for landlords who were voluntarily lowering or freezing rents. I think all solutions that would have either encouraged the building of more housing or incentivized more stable rents. But unfortunately, those don't seem to have gone anywhere. But, we still got today's the halfway mark. So we've got 30 days left to try to get Representative Barkis and Representative Lowe's bills through the finish line.
And Laurel, I would just add one small nuance to all of this. I agree with everything that's been said, but I think, we're trying to take a bite at this apple every which way we can. And so often we see the majority party introduce bills that are tied to 80% AMI for all of their housing programs. And for folks like me who represent rural communities, that 80% AMI just doesn't work. And so I think you'll see over the week in floor debate, we'll be trying to attach amendments that would adjust that AMI from 80% up to right now up to 100%, but I think a more realistic AMI for rural communities is like 150%. So doing everything we can to understand the nuances of housing in rural communities is important. And I think we just need to keep having that conversation so that folks, as Senator Short mentioned, represent urban areas, understand the realities of trying to build housing and density in rural communities. So it's just a conversation that needs to continue.
Laurel, did you have a follow-up?
Just briefly, I wanted to follow up on something Senator Short said. One of the things I was hearing when watching the ADU bill in committee was that, it kind of undermines the GMA and that there's concern that it's just going to lead to more sprawl in rural areas without necessarily the urban infrastructure that it needs. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, the balance of creating more housing in rural areas, but keeping an agriculture focus and protecting some of those lands too.
Oh, great question. Great follow-up. And yes, there was a lot of discussion in committee on that. What I would say is there's a misnomer that a detached ADU has different impacts than an attached one. And I vehemently disagree with that. If you're attaching, you're increasing, how many people can live in a home and how you're going to provide water and sewer or septic in that case. But the bills that we've seen, really are thoughtful. The detached ADU should be built close to the house. It should use the same driveway, the same footprint. Your well has got to be able to support both. And I think that's in nod just to the challenges that we have with water availability. Look, there's nothing in any of those bills that say that you're undoing critical areas protections or natural resource lands protections. If you have property and you have the footprint of your initial house, doing it with say 500 to 1,000 feet, it's not like you're creating a whole new road system or, utility impacts. I mean, generally keeping those homes close to where the original home is really minimizes those impacts. So I think we can do it in a way that absolutely preserves the intent of even GMA in our rural areas. But look, I have businesses right now that want to add third shifts to manufacturers, and they can't because there are not houses available. They can't hire employees with a lack of housing. So, what Representative Steele said holds true. We're trying a number of different options in order to do that. There are also other, other proposals with our colleagues across the aisle. And I think it's all of the above. But because I live in a rural community, or Senator Braun does, or Representative Steele, I think we can do those things and still be very protective of our environment.
All right, next we'll go to Carlene Johnson.
Hey, good morning. It's kind of a broad question, and some of you touched on it already in your opening remarks, but is there a single piece of legislation, and any of you could answer, that you're most frustrated or concerned that the majority is moving forward, or I guess most frustrated and concerned because it's not moving forward? And again, I know it's a really broad question.
Well, I would certainly highlight the one I already talked about with 5770. The property tax rate increase is just I think a bad bill for Washington State. But I'm going to take a little different direction since you asked the question. The things I'm most frustrated that are not moving forward beyond that is the initiatives. I remind the group that there are 2.6 million signatures, 800,000 individual people. That's 20% of our electorate. And they can't take the time to even hear the initiatives, let alone vote on them. That in spite of the very clear language in the Constitution, there's a high degree of frustration that 800,000 people, 2.6 million signatures, and you can't take the time for a public hearing. that should be unacceptable.
Well, and Carlene, I'd like to add one that I'm concerned seems to be on a fast track, and that's House Bill 1589. It's been dubbed the anti-natural gas bill. This is the one that actually the Senate Environment Committee has already heard the bill, even before we were done with hearing Senate bills in that committee. And look, I was here when coal was the topic of conversation, and you're looking at emissions and you're looking at the concerns and how even the environmental community said, natural gas is the way to go. There's 50% less emissions. We can do a great job in this state if we just embrace natural gas as an alternative, as other sources of energy are being developed. And it's baseload. You have it when you need it. Well, now we come to the point where all of a sudden natural gas is bad. Now, the bill itself doesn't have the word ban natural gas in it, but the bill language is very clear in the expectations. It now tells the utility to go to the Utilities and Transportation Committee, and it can certainly be considered. We asked the UTC how they'd handle that process, and they just said in committee, well, we will do what we're told. That was pretty stunning. And to have that admission from the regulatory entity that really protects ratepayers from excessive cost. There's a new definition of cost effective. What that means, there's no cost cap. If you're a manufacturer, you're not going to like that. That says your costs could be, just dramatic when it comes to needing power for maybe power intensive manufacturing. And it gets to the issue of dependability as well. There was a lot of discussion on renewable natural gas, but it was very plain and clear that the answers were that's not going to be a one-to-one replacement. That can be a niche energy source that can be used here or there. So really the question comes down to are ratepayers, are the costs going to be, just monstrous costs to them to see this changeover? Is it going to be reliable? Is there going to be electricity when you need it? Only like 2.5 weeks ago, utilities were sending out warnings that, hey, conserve what you're using, both in Eastern and in Western Washington. And at the other end of the spectrum is the transmission capacity. There are timelines potentially in this bill that could affect whether or not transmission can even handle these alternative sources of energy, in trying to get natural gas out of the system. Now, they'll say, oh, there aren't words that are banning natural gas, but really what it does it administratively. And I'm really concerned about ratepayers and the impacts to that. We have to be responsible and understand as we reduce emissions, we have to do it in an achievable way. Going to intermittent renewables and getting rid of our baseload capacity to meet power demand when it's there is irresponsible. We need to continue to make sure natural gas is available, and this bill doesn't do it.
Yeah, Carlene, I would say I'll echo a lot of that. I think the worst bill that has passed the House so far is the one that Senator Short just mentioned, that would essentially outlaw natural gas. The most disappointing ones that haven't moved are probably the initiatives, as Senator Braun said. So I echo his comments there. And then I'll just point out what I said at the top too. We've got a lot of crises that are facing Washington State. We've got a public safety crisis, but there's been no bills moved to hire more police officers. Instead, a bill passed out of appropriations yesterday that would have, reduced sentences and allowed judges to let criminals out even earlier. We've got a drug crisis, but have not taken any real meaningful action on fentanyl. Yesterday passed out a bill to try to toughen up some laws regarding foster kids, but Republican amendments to toughen penalties for when kids die from fentanyl were rejected. We've got an affordability crisis, but no movement on bills that would make Washington more affordable. Instead, we're passing things like the natural gas ban bill that is going to make Washington more unaffordable. So that's kind of my summary, I would say.
Carly, did you have a follow-up?
So, no, I was just gonna say, you gotta keep those car dealers in business. Plug for my son, Lake City Way Toyota. No, it's all good.
All right, next we'll go to Josh Farley.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the time. I'm curious to know your thoughts on Senate Bill 5002, which would reduce the state's blood alcohol concentration limit for DUI from 0.08 to 0.05. And it does seem to have a fair amount of momentum this session. And I don't believe there's a member here, maybe of the two committees, that have heard it yet. But I'm kind of looking to find out from a leadership level three different things, if you're willing to speak on this. Number one, how do you plan to vote if you're put in the position that 5002 is on the floor and ready to go? Number two, if there's cohesion amongst Republicans on this issue in the House and the Senate. We've seen several members come forward in each chamber that has expressed some support. And then number three, if there are pros and cons being weighed here, and what you're grappling with regard to the issues. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Josh. I think I'm the only member here that works directly in hospitality and represents a district that has a multitude of wineries and breweries and cideries. And I've heard loud and clear from my folks that this is not a bill that's supported. We work really hard in my district to advocate for responsibility, drinking responsibly, and training folks that serve, how to notice folks who have been overserved. But look, I mean, the reality is folks who are making an irresponsible decision to overindulge and get behind a wheel are not the folks that are going to be affected by the passage of this bill. Anytime the government gets involved to try and regulate behavior for the least common denominator, multiple folks suffer. So I would suggest, that the hospitality industry is opposed to this bill. We have worked really hard to develop a reputation that is a responsible one. And I don't think that government should be involved in every aspect of our lives. It's already illegal to get drunk and drive. And so we need to focus on that behavior versus penalizing the folks that want to go and have a singular glass of wine for dinner and do it in a responsible way. So I think that's the challenge here. It's not really getting to the crux of the issue, which is, those folks, again, who want to overindulge, who are going to overindulge anyway and get irresponsibly behind the wheel and potentially do damage. So I think that's the real issue that I have with the bill.
Yeah, I would share many of the comments that Representative Steele made. I mean, you asked how I'm going to vote. I think we're all still deciding that. If I voted those today, I would not support the bill, but I'm keeping an open mind. In terms of our caucus, I think we have folks on both sides of this issue in our caucus, but the vast majority is concerned about the bill for the reasons expressed by Representative Steele. And then the final one was, you asked about the pros and cons. You laid out, the pros. I think all of us were interested in this bill to begin with. We're all interested in reducing the impacts of driving under influence, and if anything that would help, we're interested in. When you actually look at the facts, as we learn more, as folks like to point to Utah, I think there was a decline in the first year. The evidence shows it's kind of bounced back, and it's not where it was before. So maybe this policy doesn't do what advertised. A lot of folks will say, and I tend to agree with this, that the real safety challenge on our roads is not folks driving with low levels of influence. It's repeat high level DUIs. That's the ones that are inevitably causing the tragic accidents and fatalities. And that's where we should focus. And we do have a bill from Senator Padden, who is focused on that fourth DUI, making sure that we hold folks accountable who are doing this over and over again. And then the other thing I would say is, wasn't pointed out, is the reality is if someone is driving recklessly with a lower level of intoxication, they can already be pulled over and charged with reckless driving. We already cover this with law. I'm not sure why another law on top of that is going to make us better. So while on the face of it, we all say, yes, we are very committed to stopping, terrible, tragic incidents on our roads, and driving under influence. This does not, on balance, seem to be a policy that actually helps us get there. And we should look for policy that's actually going to work and make our roads safer.
Did you have a follow-up, Josh?
Yeah, I could ask about housing. I'm curious. There's some legislation I think on both sides right now that would create either a standalone or an additional MFTE, multifamily property tax exemption program for developers converting from existing retail commercial spaces into residential housing. I wondered if any of you would want to take a crack at sort of your feelings on that and whether that would help to alleviate our state's housing crisis.
I am aware of the bill. I think that we're interested in the bill. It's not the panacea that folks will suggest. We do have an excess in commercial housing. That's certainly true, but the cost of converting it turns out to be pretty high because it's just not built in a way that you can't just change the window dressing and call it a day. You really have to work hard to get the types of to meet code for residential, and that's turning out to be problematic. I mean, broadly, I think certainly I think my caucus is supportive of ways to encourage that, but it's tough going. We shouldn't, and so if we can encourage it in a way that actually helps, absolutely. If it's just another, it's not clear this is a direction that's going to get us there is the problem. So we're helpful, but not optimistic this is going to solve our broader problem.
Yeah, I think that's my viewpoint as well from the House. Representative Steele mentioned a minute ago that in another housing question that we're trying to attack this from all angles, and this is one angle worthy of attack, and trying to incentivize folks and maybe hope a few more projects pencil out. But like Senator Braun said, the reality on the ground is it looks easy to people that aren't involved in the building trades like me from the outside. Oh, there's a building, there's a lot of vacancies. Let's put some new walls up and call them an apartment. But the reality is the codes are different. The structures are built differently. It's enormously expensive to convert it. And, so I don't think it will solve the problem. But again, if we can move the needle just a little bit to help move a few buildings over, that's probably worth it. I only know this because I was looking at renting an office there about 10 years ago, but there's a building in downtown Tacoma, the Washington building, that was a commercial building that recently got converted to residential. So it can happen, but it's the exception rather than the rule, and we shouldn't trick ourselves into thinking that that's going to be the silver bullet. We need all different kinds of housing and all different kinds of strategies and incentives to get us there.
Actually, one thing I'll add, one thing I see in my community, there's a developer who's buying some older hotels in an effort to turn those into small studios. I'm not sure if that's going to work out, but I think it's interesting. I mean, that's the great thing about our broader economy is folks are all out there looking for ways to make this possible. So while I'm not sure it works in all cases, there's certainly maybe some cases where it works well, and we have folks out there trying it right now. If we can help them, we should try and help them.
Thank you.
All right, next we will go to John Stang. Are you there, John? John? Okay, we'll move to the next question. This comes from Shauna Salisbury of the McClatchy. She asks about House Bill 1889, professional licenses and certification regardless of immigration status. It passed executive session with only Democratic support. Why no Republican support on that bill?
Yeah, so I think our caucus had a couple concerns there. Just wanting to be careful given our interaction of state law with federal law. Folks that aren't here without documentation can't legally work here. That's sort of the definition of being here without documentation. So there was concern about setting up undocumented folks for failure by telling them they can have a state license when the feds won't actually allow them to work here. So I think that was the main one. But anyone who is here who has a work visa, we don't think that the state license rules would prohibit them from getting licensed. So that was kind of our main issue was, not wanting to extend false promises.
All right, John, are you able to ask your question now? Can't hear you. Yeah, sorry, I can't hear you, John. With that, and in the interest of time, just like to go to closing remarks. Senator Braun, would you like to start?
Sure. It will be quick. Just a reminder, we have a lot of things going on. We talked about a lot of topics today. Many of them overlap with our key focuses on public safety, on affordability, on kids and education. We're going to have a lot of, debate on the floor over the next week or so. And I think you're going to see us continue to focus on those things. We're going to deal with other issues, but our priority is going to be on those issues and making them better for the state of Washington. Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, same here from the House's perspective. We'll be voting on a lot of bills. Plenty will be bipartisan, but frankly, a lot of those probably aren't gonna save the world. But we are gonna show up every day on the floor and look at bills closely and work really hard to fix the crises that are confronting Washington. Oppose bills that will make the crises worse, but support bills that are gonna fix Washington.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.